Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we are prone to do, we like to make ridiculous political predictions way too early in the cycle. And that's what we're going to do this time. We're actually going to make predictions about who is going to succeed Trump in the Republican Party, because a CPAC poll was just released of a bunch of conservative activists. And it's interesting to see who's actually who's in the lead, who's surging. Some of this will surprise you and some of it will not surprise you at all. But the real question that we have to ask is, okay, great, this is a CPAC poll, but what do we think is most likely to happen? And we have three scenarios that we are going to run down today, and you can tell us which one you think is most likely to transpire. And with me in the with me in the studio to discuss it is our Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How you doing?
Okay, I'm in the audience.
All right, Christian.
It's okay. You screwed up. I screwed up. I didn't have my mic in front of me. So.
That's right. Jeez, we're just a bunch of screw-ups.
We're off to a great start.
Just a bunch of screw-ups. All right, so we have the recent CPAC poll coming out. What did we learn from that, Christian?
So as expected, Vance is leading, but I believe he slipped from last year, and Rubio has gained quite a lot. Oh, look, there's a alert about Trump attending a Supreme Court argument today about birthright citizenship. So I've got this article from Fox News up talking about this, and it says that J.D. Vance has long been seen as the heir apparent, but quite a lot has happened since the last CPAC last year, right? For example, Rubio's strong second place finish this weekend, suggests that, I think that certain people, and we're going to talk about this, I think certain people are trying to push a primary fight between the two.
Yeah. I think there's some here's. I think most people saw J.D. Vance as kind of like the natural heir apparent. He was very, very close to Trump. They seemed to be like everything that they were doing. Like Vance was out there quite frequently, and Vance hasn't been out there as much lately. Rubio has been, and that makes sense because we had the issue with Greenland, and then with Venezuela, and then with Cuba, and then with Iran, and so there's a lot of foreign policy stuff going on. So obviously, the Secretary of State is going to feature a little bit more prominently. And in this case, Rubio has favored very well. His speech in Munich was like very Reagan-esque. Like it was very well done. Vance, I think part of the reason why Vance might be a little bit more in the background now is not just because it's foreign affairs, and so the Secretary of State is out there a little more, Defense Secretary is out there, or Secretary of War is out there a little bit more. I think what it also is Vance has always, from what I understand, Vance has always been a lot more uncomfortable with the policy of what's going on in Iran as well. So it's interesting to see what's happening right now. I think both Vance and Rubio have done an excellent job thus far in the administration. Both of them have presented very well. They've done very well. They've done impressive things. Rubio did the most impressive things up front leading into the CPAC event that took place. Like he had that speech in Munich, and then he had that other thing where he just broke out into Spanish, where he was talking to the leaders of the Western Hemisphere. And again, it's cool.
He was Trump's interpreter at that event, talking about Cuba and Venezuela.
Yeah.
I mean, it suits his role, right? He was a politician from Florida. He's got a Hispanic background. Well, actually, he's got
Cuban. Yeah.
The funny thing was when he gave that speech in Munich, he talked about his ancestors from the Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont.
Yeah,
which is actually interesting because my family's from on my grandmother's side. They're from the what used to be the Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, which became Italy. But just to read off the numbers, that way the audience has them. So the CPAC poll had Vance at 53%, Rubio at 35%, and everybody was like, talking about this because last year Vance was at 61, so he fell, from 61 to 53. There's another component here that might be overlooked quite a lot, but bear with me. So I'm sure you've seen what they call the JD Vance memes. Have you seen where he looks like a cloud with the curly hair?
Yeah, he like dressed up at his Halloween.
Yeah, the fat JD Vance memes, or the kid with like there's a million variants. People like collect them like trading cards now. Somebody has pointed out that the JD Vance memes are these like silly, kooky, weird, presentations of Vance. There's also a series of Marco Rubio memes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the Marco Rubio memes are always him sitting at that couch in the Oval Office.
Oh, yeah.
And the meme will always be like Marco Rubio realizing that he now has to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And somebody pointed out that notice how there's a difference between the way that the public, almost like zeitgeist when it comes to Vance is different than Rubio. With Vance, it's like silly.
Yeah.
And doesn't really carry a whole lot of weight. With Rubio, it's always like Marco Rubio finding out he now has to become the supreme leader of Iran, or become the, dictator of Venezuela, or, that he has to rule Cuba. Like, it's always him doing something. And somebody pointed out that, like, that could explain in a funny way, not that this is the cause, this is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator, right? But like that these memes could be illustrative of how a segment of the right has come to view Rubio in a much more positive light over the last year or two, which I think is why certain people are now thinking that he might be a future presidential candidate, because he was one in 2016, but there wasn't really talk until probably recently that he might run again.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting that the meme thing and the poll thing kind of caught my eye.
Well, I think if we look at some of the other people that, you had people like Ron DeSantis. If you look at the Real Clear Politics polling right now, you have Ron DeSantis in third place. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is thrown out there. Nikki Haley, which is never going to happen. Ted Cruz. And now there's also some discussion. I think Rand Paul might seriously consider running again based off of what's going on the foreign policy side. So there's no question that there is a significant element within kind of MAGA, within kind of the definitely with America First, that is frustrated or just downright angry about what's going on in Iran right now. And I'm not including the Dave Smiths of the world, right? The Dave Smith and the rest of those guys kind of jump ship immediately as if they were ever really on the ship. But there are a lot of people that are supportive of President Trump, that they're really concerned about what's going on with Iran. And this also kind of makes it interesting as you look at not only going into the midterms, but going into the presidential year in 2028, because if JD Vance and Rubio are the front runners, they're actually in a difficult position, right? Because insofar as they might disagree with something the administration is doing, they still have to be generally supportive of the administration. That's the role, right? You serve, with the exception of vice president, you serve at the pleasure of the president. And so this idea that, you could come out there and say, oh, well, I love everything Trump's doing except for this. You're not doing that as the secretary of whatever, right? That isn't happening. You're not doing that as members of his cabinet unless you plan to resign. And I don't think Rubio or Vance plan to do that. And so it'll be interesting to see, because their futures will in some way be inevitably linked to the Trump administration. Whereas somebody on the outside like Ron DeSantis has the ability to pivot. They have the ability to run kind of exclusively on their record as governor without getting caught up. They can kind of be with the president when it works for them, and they can kind of create a little space or create a little distance on certain policies when it doesn't. And so I think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens from this, because the other thing too is understand CPAC is this is not a scientific poll that's conducted. This is 1,500 conservative activists, but it's also been pointed out before that the CPAC poll usually gives you a decent pulse of where kind of the broader conservative movement is at any given time. But that's going to be the question, right? Okay, because we've got, a little over 2 years left of the Trump administration, because we've got midterms, and midterms is going to decide a lot, because if the Democrats take control of either house, all you're going to get is committee hearings on claiming that everything Trump does is illegal. You're going to get a never ending, because the Democrats know they won't be able to pass legislation. So the only thing they're going to do is they're going to just do one kind of tribunal after the next of bringing up people that they perceive to be as victims of Trump's policies, speaking before committees. And it'll probably be, 3-1 with their witnesses versus a Republican witness, just talking about how horrible Trump is and how he's ruining their life and families have been ripped apart and you name it, right? That will be the final 2 years of the Trump administration if they win in November. And obviously that's going to put anybody associated with the Trump administration in a difficult position, because then the question becomes, well, how do the people perceive what's going on next? Because as we mentioned before, some people are wondering, well, why is Trump doing all this stuff internationally? And there's reasoning behind it. You said this before, that ironically, President Trump has more power over what goes on in, Iran than he does what goes on within the United States, because our Constitution is written in such a way as to prevent the concentration of power in the hands of the executive. And so while there is a lot the president can do with the executive, it's severely limited by the legislature by design. Now, the way that the foreign policy is also kind of restricted by the legislature is the power of the purse. This is why Trump is now talking about they should have some sort of, they could end the war within 2 to 3 weeks, which kind of, that gets you pretty close to the War Powers Act and the 60 days. And now is Congress going to approve the additional funding for fighting in Iran, right? So all of these factors are playing into this, but there's no question that if the Democrats take charge, the Trump administration is going to essentially be neutered for the last 2 years. And I don't think, I can't see any pathway where that has a great, I can't see where that's ever really good for J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. Theoretically, you can find some situation where if the people actually blame the Democrats instead of the Trump administration, but usually these things are a referendum on who's in power, and they tend to blame the president. And that creates space for someone like a Ron DeSantis or even another, another player that we're not even really familiar with yet, or maybe it isn't featuring very prominently right now, to emerge. And that kind of gets us into the kind of where we go with this on what could happen in 2028.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure that you'd agree with me that like the right is in a really weird place right now.
The weirdest I've ever seen.
Like all of the older traditional movements that we used to associate with the right are pretty much dead, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. Although not entirely dead. So the first one, like when I built the outline for this, and I was thinking like, where is the right going to go in the future? The first point that I came across, not that we would agree with it, but the first point to address was the possibility of a neocon resurgence. Well,
let's focus on that before we talk about the other two. Let's focus on the neocon, because I think you're right. When I was growing up, it was fairly easy to determine between who the Republicans were and who the Democrats were. And nobody was really shocked by the people that Republicans put forward to run for office. They were all people that had a long history within the Republican Party. And then it was usually a fight between how many people like in the middle could you convince. And Bush did a decent job of that, and McCain didn't, in part because he's running against Barack Obama and it's the first black president and the whole deal. And then you get Mitt Romney as a candidate. And again, whether you like it or don't like it, it's predictable, right? Trump was way out of left field, right? Ron Paul was another character that represented the libertarian side of the Republican Party. And even though he didn't win, it started to gain in popularity, and it brought new people kind of into the mix of associating their ideas more closely with the Republican Party.
There's an older tradition that goes back to Pat Buchanan in the 90s, also against the neocons. Different reasons and motivations than Ron Paul, right? Buchanan was basically a paleoconservative, but like the neocon, you grew up at a time, and I did at the end of this, but you grew up at a time when the neocons were like basically peaking on the right.
Yeah, they were prominent.
And I came into...
Neocon wasn't a bad term.
Yeah, I came along when the neocons were still around, but they were on their way out the door, right? 2012 with Mitt Romney was kind of like the last hurrah. That's fine. 2012 with Mitt Romney was kind of like the last hurrah. For the neocons. But I mean, you came along, with Reagan and Bush, and at the time it wasn't. Well, it wasn't neocon in the way that we now call it. What it was fusionist. It retrospectively, that's what we would call it, because it was a neoconservative foreign policy. Mm-hmm. It was a kind of libertarian economic position with evangelical social conservatism. And that was the unification of those 3 points.
Well, but that was unique to Reagan. Like the important part to understand is before Reagan, like you're talking about Nixon, you're talking about Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was
Rockefeller with the liberal Republicans.
Yeah. Rockefeller would be a Democrat today. Gerald Ford would be a Democrat today, most likely.
Barry Goldwater.
Yeah. What you had the beginning of a revolution.
Not that I think Goldwater would be a Democrat, but
no. Barry Goldwater definitely wouldn't be a Democrat. Barry Goldwater was the beginning of the Reagan Revolution. So Barry Goldwater was this massive departure from. You started to see Republicans after the New Deal. you started to see big government Republicans. Like it really just became more and more prominent. I mean, you saw it a little bit with Teddy Roosevelt and kind of more, but after the New Deal, Eisenhower didn't reduce taxes. Eisenhower did big government projects. I mean, you can say that I like the interstate. Okay. But conservatism really had become just doing the Democrat stuff, but slower and more within the constitutional model. Whereas Democrats, you had Senator Fulbright saying that the Constitution was hampering the great, President FDR and his mission to be the father of the nation. Like, Democrats have been moving in this progressive, centralized power direction for a long time. I mean, arguably Woodrow Wilson,
I would say back to William Jennings Bryan.
Yes, but William Jennings Bryan never won an election, right? But Woodrow Wilson was the first major progressive president. Republicans started to go, but again, they started to adopt kind of the big government, New Deal programs, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden you have Barry Goldwater coming along, and he's a radical departure. He's like, no, I'm going back to hardcore conservative, limited government. Government is the problem. He gets wiped out by Lyndon Johnson, but he develops a very loyal following from a philosophical wing within the Republican Party. Then you also have people like William F. Buckley. And that's starting to, gain a strong philosophical grounding. You have Ronald Reagan giving his Time for Choosing speech in 1964, which you could take that speech and play it today and be like, oh, dang, just change the numbers around and everything he's talking about is relevant right now. But when Reagan got elected governor of California and then he got elected president, that's where you saw this coalition where you had the religious right, the social conservatives, you had the free market, economic libertarian, and then you had the strong national defense kind of team. And a lot of the neocons were in your strong national defense kind of area. It was making the world safe for democracy, sort of.
The older right, the remnants of that older right that came out of that came out of the aftermath of the New Deal, and maybe even traced their origins back before the New Deal. Mm-hmm. They also supported Reagan in the 80s. But under the, you mentioned Billy Buckley, there was this big tension in the 60s, 70s, and 80s between Billy Buckley and the National Review type neocons, and that older right tradition that went back to Robert Taft, the non-interventionists, the paleo-conservatives, the guys that were part of the John Birch Society in the 50s and stuff like that were far more nativist, far more protectionist, far more, because people forget that the Republican Party was very protectionist.
They
were about 100 years ago. William McKinley, Mr. Tariff, was a Republican. He was one of the most famous Republican presidents before the New Deal. And there was still that chunk of the right that had those beliefs, even though FDR just bulldozed them, right? And they still supported Reagan as well. But that's my whole point. There was this tension that never went away because the paleocons that are in the modern age, by modern, okay, I'm talking 50, 60 years ago, right? But the paleocons were best represented by those type of groups, like John Birch Society, by Pat Buchanan, Robert Taft, who was briefly Senate Majority Leader in the 50s until he died of cancer. Those guys didn't agree with the neocons on a lot of things, but they did both support Reagan basically in the 80s.
Well, and it's important to understand too that part of the reason why when Reagan won, because again he lost to Gerald Ford at the Republican National Convention. And then when he won in 1980, there was a lot of compromises. Bringing on George Bush Sr. was a compromise as his vice president. Bringing on Baker was a compromise. Reagan, there was a lot of people that Reagan had to basically work with and bring into his cabinet in order to get the votes necessary to win the Republican nomination. And then once he had it, he was so popular after his first year. So he won significantly in 1980. But in 1984, he crushed it. I mean, Mondale won Washington, D.C. and Minnesota.
And it was recount territory in Minnesota.
Yeah. We can't even conceive of that anymore where a president wins so overwhelmingly as Reagan did. And keep in mind, the press at that point was trying to claim that Reagan hadn't won a mandate. He won 49 states, and the press was working overtime to say, would you really consider this a mandate? Like, are you freaking kidding me? But the point is that point, that's where the neocons realized that whether you liked it or not, you had to adopt Reagan language. Reagan was the undisputed leader of the party to the degree that even today we have Reagan, we have Reagan parties and Republican committees all over the country. We don't have George Bush dinners. We don't have, Gerald Ford dinners. We don't have Richard Nixon dinners. We have Reagan dinners, right? So the neocons learned this, but you saw that as soon as George Bush was president, you got a lot more the neocon side, but you didn't get the Reagan-esque side when it came to social conservatism. You didn't get the Reagan-esque side when it came to economics. You didn't get any of that.
You just got the neocon side.
You just got the neocon side.
They were terrible. In retrospect, like looking back, I really think that the neocons were terrible political allies, if you think about it.
Yes.
They hijacked the right, used it for their own ideological purposes, and they were never team players. That whole fusionist thing that I was talking about, where you had all these different groups, these rival groups in many cases, all uniting behind one single candidate to do one great thing and get him across the finish line and give him as big of a mandate as possible. When the neocons basically took over the party after Reagan for a generation, for like a 20-plus year period from 1988 all the way to 2012, basically.
Yeah, because
they ran the party.
We had Bush Sr., then we had Bob Dole that ran against Clinton.
Then you had George W. Bush.
Then we had George W.
Bush.
Then
McCain, and then Romney.
Then Romney. Like it was just straight neocons since Bush Sr. Now here's the question. Now when you list all that, you would think the people that have the least amount of support in the modern Republican Party right now, because there is no question that Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, but there's fractures. There's definitely fractures that are building right now. So what is the scenario where the neocons of all the factions of the right, what is the scenario where the neocons come into power?
I mean, this is like the worst case scenario, right? That the right gets reverted back to 2012.
Yeah.
Which we don't want to see, but it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible because a big chunk of them have gone over to the Democrats.
Yeah.
Because of Trump.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Bill Kristol.
Oh, Bill Kristol
is now a Democrat.
Biggest turncoat. Bill Kristol's not just a Democrat now. Bill Kristol.
He's tweeting about like transgenderism and stuff like that.
If there was ever a person.
And abolish ICE.
Yeah. If there was ever a person that demonstrated that he had no strong philosophical grounding in
outside of foreign
philosophy.
Regime change wars.
Yeah, other than foreign regime change and maybe, the occasional tax bill, it's Bill Kristol. What a disappointment.
But here's what the neocons I think are really trying to do. They want to take over a party. Mm-hmm. They don't know which party to take over yet. They're split right now between the Democrats and the Republicans. There are still plenty of neocons on the right that are waiting in the wings, waiting for this whole populist movement to pass by, and they think that they'll be able to get back in. A chunk of them have gone over and just joined the Democrats, right? They've gone full Bill Kristol. So they're split right now.
Yeah. But the Reagan, whatever, or not Reagan, what is the Lincoln Republicans?
Yeah, the Lincoln Project. Those people are basically guys, Democrats, right?
They're totally Democrats.
But you still have Lindsey Graham, right? You still have people like that are they're still Republicans, right?
It's the John Thunes, it's the John Cornyn's, it's all of the Republicans that you probably haven't heard much about, but win every election cycle wherever they're at. It's the random Republican governor somewhere. But that the best I could see them making is this kind of return to normalcy argument, is they'll essentially make the claim that Trump was kind of a diversion in the Republican Party's overall trajectory, and now we need to get back to somebody that's a little bit more, they're a little bit more presidential in their temperament and their speech, and they make kind of Reagan-esque speeches about optimism and all coming together and we're all one people. Like, that's the only argument that I can see them making. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think it sells, because name me one neocon right now, one neocon that you think is generally popular on the right.
That's hard to. Well, the thing is that there's a lot of people across the board, regardless of their ideological label, that are unpopular right now. We're in a very anti-incumbent age.
Can I give you? Let me give you my scenario where I think a neocon actually like wins the Republican nomination.
Okay, go ahead.
Democrats win the midterms. For the next 2 years, all we hear is tribunals and impeachment hearings against President Trump. J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio can't really extricate themselves from it, or maybe one of them does, and now they're fighting each other, so that splits the vote over there. Then you have a third option in someone like Ron DeSantis that's still associated with MAGA. But essentially what you have is like maybe 3 MAGA candidates that are all fighting one another and splitting the vote between them. And then you get a fourth option in the form of somebody that kind of plays this elder statesman role and calms everything down. In fact, it may be someone that the general population isn't, wildly aware of right now. I actually, let me give you a scenario here. And I don't consider him a neocon, but I consider him more of like the sort of Republican that we used to kind of recognize, Glenn Youngkin. So I like Glenn Youngkin. Right?
He fits more into this category than he does like the libertarians or the paleo-conservatives or anything
Glenn
like
Youngkin's
that.
not a libertarian, is not a paleo-conservative. I want to describe him as like a gung-ho.
He's not a populist.
He's not a populist, not a gung-ho MAGA guy. Here's what Glenn Youngkin is. Glenn Youngkin was a very effective CEO. And when he became governor, he was very big on, hey, what are like just the basic issues that we can hit on, that we can work together on. Now, what Glenn totally realized from the Democrats was they just wanted to subvert him at every turn. And
they did.
And they did because they had the votes, right? They did. But Glenn Youngkin falls into that category where you have someone where, again, he's not considered hardcore MAGA. He's not considered hardcore, he's not neocon or anything like that. But you could see him as kind of a return to, hey, good guy, did as good a job as he possibly could have as a governor of a purple state, now effectively a blue state, without ever controlling the legislature. He likes to really focus on kind of home cooking issues and like economic development. He doesn't dive too much into the social issues. He doesn't necessarily avoid them, but he doesn't dive too much into them. He doesn't make them a main, feature. So imagine DeSantis, Rubio, and Vance just eviscerating each other because they all see each other as the heir apparents of MAGA. And then Glenn Youngkin coming up and being the guy.
Glenn Youngkin is the Republican equivalent of this meme right here. So I want to first read this is hilarious. Some top Democrats are quietly, saying that in order to win in 2028, they need to nominate perhaps a straight white Christian man. First Lady Michelle Obama said recently that the country's not ready for a woman. And some Democrat strategists have said, quote, it has to be a white guy. And so there's this meme that's made the rounds on the internet, and I said they're going to do this. Here's what the meme is. I'm a gay Eskimo and a Republican. Isn't that wacky? LOL. Versus I'm Democrat John Normalson. I'm going to say 2 to 3 basic things about good governance and not take any bait and win. Then I'm going to vote like Mao.
Oh, yeah.
So Glenn Youngkin is the Republican John Normalson, basically.
Well, and again, I'm not saying this to be, I'm not saying this to trash Glenn Youngkin.
No, John Normalson has a great win record.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just, and again, I don't mean to imply that Glenn isn't a principled guy. I think he is. It's just that I think Glenn focuses more on the idea of what is good governance. And that's a scenario where you get someone that falls more into like the category that Republicans had run for 20 years straight. Glenn might be an heir to that. Even though, again, I'm not trying to put him in. I'm not trying to do this as a pejorative against Glenn. I'm just saying I can see an area where he's not hardcore MAGA. He's not considered hardcore conservative. He's definitely not considered libertarian. And that could be the sort of guy in that scenario. But I think we both agree that like a hardcore return of the neocon, a Lindsey Graham style guy, that is not happening.
I don't think we're going back to 2012.
I don't either. All right. Let's go into, path 2. Path 2 is the return of MAGA. So we had MAGA under Trump, then we had Biden, then we had return of MAGA with Trump part 2.0. And a lot of people were very happy with how energetic the Trump administration was with things like Doge. But then there were some major hiccups. The first major hiccup was the Epstein files. And the second controversial. And the reason I say a hiccup is, let me put it this way. I don't care what the left thinks of Trump. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they think. I'm sorry. That's just where I'm at. Like if Bill Maher wanted to have a discussion about a Trump policy, I would have that because I feel like he's at least intellectually honest and consistent. But the left at large, when they get on Twitter and they're like, oh, he's a pedo. Like I don't care what you say.
I see the bills that they're carrying in Virginia. Their opinion is like they want to abolish mandatory minimum sentencing for child rape, possession of child pornography. Yeah. I'm saying all the buzzwords that's going to get us in trouble with YouTube right now. But that's what they support. They want to effectively water down the criminal penalties for these type of things, and then they'll go on the internet and be like, Donald Trump is protecting these people. No, you are. Yeah, you are, and you're trying to weaponize the rights. Disgust of all of this to suit your own ideological
you're trying to pretend
ends.
Like it's your disgust. Like I'm old enough to remember when you guys controlled everything and released nothing, right? So it's one of this is not whataboutism. This is you're a liar. You don't care about this stuff unless it advances you politically. And you did a very good. By the way, go follow Christian's channel, Christian Hines. At YouTube, you did an excellent video on this where we actually did a review of it on Monday, I think. It was last Friday. But the point is this: I don't care what the left thinks. I do not care what the left thinks. But on the right, there was a lot of frustration with the Epstein files and Pam Bondi, and there's a lot of frustration on the right with respect to the ongoing conflict in Iran. And so that's really called into question whether or not someone like a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio that are so closely tied with the administration could win the presidency in 2028. So what's your take on the prospects of, the continuation of MAGA in 2028?
I think they're quite high. It might not be called MAGA anymore, right? That might be like a unique brand to Trump, but the forces that brought Trump to power, I don't think are disappearing. Mm-hmm. It certainly looks like that it's fractured. There's been 2, maybe 3 things that have really thrown a bit of a curveball at us over the past year. I would say that this war in Iran is one that's fractured the right. Second one that's slowed down the right has been the endless lawfare from the left, like activist judges. Literally, I mean, like. Nationwide injunction, just on everything. Mm-hmm. Like there was a court ruling the other day that said that Trump had to reinstate millions of people who entered the country legally using an app that the Biden administration created. Like the Biden administration took a commercial trucking app used for inspecting cargo at the border and repurposed it into a one-stop digital shop for 1 million people to enter the country legally. Yeah. And Trump shut this down immediately after the day that he took office. He shut this down and he terminated all of it. Yeah. And you had a judge that basically said, no, you must continue to do this. Yeah. Well, this is also another, we talk about. That's just one example. Yeah. We talk about how the Democrats managed to obstruct Republicans and still rule through the bureaucracy. They also do it through the judiciary. They do it through the judicial appointments. You see it with KBJ, who is regularly proving that she's the dumbest member of the Supreme Court. But this is part of their strategy, is control the bureaucracy, control the judiciary, because they outlast the elected officials. Now, what I've seen is that on what we might call, like the America First crowd, some of those guys are upset with Trump because they don't feel like he's being hard enough. And you got to look at, now some of them are mad about like foreign stuff. Okay, fine. Let's leave that aside for a second. Let's just focus on where they're mad at Trump on the domestic side. A lot of them, you see this within the Nick Fuentes crowd. It's like, well, Trump should just do this. It's like, okay, well, now you're telling Trump to just completely throw out the Constitution and do what he wants. And that's typically not how conservatives govern. And it's just typically not how you do it if you actually want to preserve the Constitution. But it's that push for a strong man, because there's no question that in my lifetime, Donald Trump has been the most willing to use executive power in order to achieve objectives and to push the limits on things. And by the way, I totally support it. I'm happy about it. But the question then becomes is, okay, if he's not able to get more done, either because of the legislature, does that harm the impression? Does that cause people to go home on MAGA? Because I think what we're seeing is
The people that were Trump supporters because they thought he was not going to get us involved in anything foreign, those people are mad. And there's no question. And I'm seeing people I respect, by the way, get onto social media and say some pretty stupid things. I saw some, I'm not going to say him by name, but he's a guy I really respect, popular podcaster. And it was this whole idea of, well, I'm not buying their lies anymore. It's like, okay, well then what you're going to get is Democrats. And not only will they lie to you, right, but they're going to do all the things that you absolutely despise and hate. I've said this before. One of the biggest things that Republicans screw up on is instead of making their rage at the current Republican establishment known in the primaries, they make it known in the general, right? They do the whole, the parties are all the same. And so they stay home. Democrats get elected. Lo and behold, they find out that the parties are not all the same. But guess who they left in place? They left in place the same Republican establishment they don't like because they thought, well, no, we voted for Trump. We got rid of the Republican establishment. Like, stop telling me you love the Constitution when you clearly have not taken a little bit of time to understand how it actually works. You have to get rid of the legislators you don't like. And you can do that effectively with the primary. But the question is, can MAGA continue, especially under a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives for the past 2 years?
So I don't know if MAGA, the brand, can continue. But the macro forces that brought Trump to power in 2016, that brought him to the forefront of American politics in 2015, have not disappeared.
Those have been there before. They had to have somebody that could actually galvanize, they could see as a leader.
That's true. Yes. So I'm not making a judgment call here over, are the Democrats going to win the midterms? Yeah, most likely. Like the history of midterm elections for generations now have been backlash against the party in the White House. So yes, if history is any judge, we will lose the House. And we will probably get close to losing the Senate. The Senate map is very favorable to us, so it'd be hard. I mean, we're trying our best to lose the Senate, but who knows?
Really is doing his best.
We're trying to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, but most likely Democrats will take the House. They'll pick up like the North Carolina Senate seat, maybe the Maine seat, and we'll have a 51-49 Senate. And then 2028 becomes a toss-up that. By the time you get to the election, the Democrats might have a 52-53% chance of winning. So maybe barely more than 50-50. So they might be like tiny favorites. And who knows? They might win. They might even briefly have another trifecta. But from a macro picture, and I know that everything I just laid out is going to sound doomer. It's going to sound black-pilled. But from a macro picture, the forces that brought Trump along have not disappeared. The what R.L. Reno called the strong gods in his 2019 book, those have not disappeared. This surge of nationalism, of populism, of identitarianism, of
I get
religion, of like all of these things, this backlash against the ruling elite that Christopher Lasch was talking about 30 years ago, like that all of that is still there.
I get it. I don't disagree with you on any of that. And insofar as MAGA or Trump was seen as leading the charge against that, he galvanized that support. And there are still like a ton of people, like if you self-describe as MAGA, you are still overwhelmingly supporting President Trump. That's one of the things that the polls reflect. A lot of the people that, on the podcaster world and stuff like that, these were not gung-ho supporters of Donald Trump, right? Like they just weren't. Candace Owens was not a gung-ho supporter of Donald Trump. Tucker Carlson was not like, he might have had times where he agreed with it or times where he vehemently or vigorously supported the president, but he didn't associate himself in the same way, like he's MAGA. But when it comes to like the voters you just mentioned, they saw Trump as fighting against that. And now there's a whole podcaster environment that are trying to convince them that Trump does not represent that anymore. And they
that he's betrayed it,
or that he's betrayed it, or whatever. And now
they still want that thing.
They still want that thing, but it's increasingly become something very different than what MAGA. Well, not very different, but we'll say noticeably different than what MAGA represented. And then the other problem is that show me anyone in that coalition that is standing up to actually galvanize that kind of support. What I see here is a lot of people that would definitely be able to lead a fraction of Trump's support in a different direction. But that's all they're taking with them. Like Thomas Massie. There is no question that Thomas Massie has a strong loyalty within elements of the MAGA movement, or excuse me, within elements of the coalition that brought Trump into power. MAGA as a whole can't stand Thomas Massie because they just see him as constantly betraying Trump. And whether you consider that a fair characterization or not, it exists. And so we come into this situation where you could see Massie potentially keeping his seat, right? But does Massie lead that charge? I don't think he does. Rand Paul.
I don't think the libertarian moment's going to happen.
I don't think the libertarian moment's going to happen as well, in part because if you look at the libertarians, you got everyone from the guy running the Ron Paul Institute who is talking more about like Gaza and all of that than he is anything else.
And you've got the Cato types that are open borders.
Then you've got the Cato types that are open borders. You got the Dave Smith types that are
impeach Trump because of Iran.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, libertarianism is never going to be a viable political faction because libertarianism is a collection of a small number of highly educated, principled, well-to-do individuals that will slot themselves into a successful political movement in order to further their principles. They understand how to work within whatever environment exists politically. And then you have a large chunk of people who are either pure lunatics or they just want to be left alone. Well, and just wanting to be left alone is not a sufficient vehicle to obtain political power. By definition, it's not.
Yeah, they're not sufficiently active to actually wield power. Well, and the problem is you do have elements within the libertarian movement, like the Jeff Deist and stuff like that, where they totally understand the moment. They totally understand what's going on right now. It's not like they've surrendered their principles. They just understand what stage of the fight that they're in, and they want to fight. Like
one can say that they understand the friend-enemy distinction.
Yeah, they're the sort of people that understand, like, look, you don't get anything libertarian if the left wins, other than maybe you'll get heavily regulated and heavily taxed pot and prostitution, right? If that's what being a libertarian is for you. But if you're someone that actually believes in like Ludwig von Mises, if you're someone that actually believes in free market economics, if you're someone that actually believes in significantly reducing regulations in the size of the federal government, you have some people within the libertarian movement that understand that in this moment right now, you don't have sufficient power to achieve everything that you would like, but you can team with these other people and you will get far more of what you want. And then you have the other wing of the Libertarian Party that is, again, it's like this rigid loyalty toward a certain kind of concept or principle. And it's like, guys, you realize you're nowhere near that, right? Like demanding everything right now makes no sense because you can't get it. And then you have the Libertarian Party. So you have the I will die on every single hill libertarians. So you have the libertarians that have good philosophy, understand what time it is, and are trying to like work with in the moment. You have libertarians that want to die on every single hill no matter what. And then you have the libertarians where they really are like quote unquote left-leaning libertarians, which I don't think even should exist as a category. But they're the sort of people that they will glob onto a particular thing. They basically engage in the same kind of oppressor-oppressed dynamic. It's just that anybody who has more government power is the oppressor. That's how they, whereas the left might categorize.
So you can't build a coalition with those people.
No.
Because when you win, they turn on you.
Yes, they turn on you because now you haven't done everything that they wanted in the timetable.
Like these are the same people that will call, Javier Milei a cuck.
Yes.
And a not true libertarian in Argentina, right? Like this is why I say this, like, despite the fact that there's plenty of people that, I mean, I don't know if they would still call themselves libertarians today, but they certainly came from a libertarian background that I think are highly competent, capable, effective political leaders that understand how to operate within any political environment in order to get wins.
Yeah.
You and I've worked with these people our entire lives. Like I could just list off so many people who I view as good friends that I think are assets. But again, they understand that you have to have power. Like Javier Milei talked about this best when he said that power is a zero-sum game and either we have it or the left does.
Yes.
And those people you can work with because they're not pure ideologues. They have a set of principles and a worldview that they want to pursue, but they are not going to turn on you the second that you are in office.
Yeah.
But you can't ally yourself. Like there's a chunk of people that call themselves libertarians that you cannot ally with them under any circumstances because it's detrimental to do so. The second you start signaling to them they think that they own you and they have leverage over you, and then they can treat you like garbage.
Yes.
Even if you agree with them on 80-90% of the issues.
They run courses on it where they tell their supporters that they say one thing that's totally true, and that's politics is just the adjudication of power. But then they go into this whole thing of like, and all politicians are tools, and that's all they are. And it's like, okay, well, guess what? That message gets around. And what ends up happening is to the extent that you have somebody in there that is trying to fight hard, they oftentimes look at it as where it's like, I know that the moment I have any disagreement, even if it's a temporary tactical one, these are the people that will show up. They will try to destroy me. And for that very reason, you can't build anything with them. You can't build it. They see you as you are their token to use as they see fit. And the moment you don't want to be used in the way they want to use you, you're now a traitor, and they will come after you and they will destroy you with few exceptions. But that's the problem. That's the problem with that. And again, where I see the continuation of what we again call MAGA here for the purposes of debate. I think it's probably going to have to be JD Vance, because I like Marco Rubio. I think Marco Rubio has really come into his own as Secretary of State. But both JD Vance and Marco Rubio were opponents to Donald Trump at one point. Right. And in some cases, JD Vance was a little bit more critical of Donald Trump and some of the things
Rubio
that he said.
literally ran against him, though.
Yeah. But JD Vance said some things that were pretty, I mean, he wasn't pulling punches there for a while. But I think you've pointed this out before. JD Vance is someone that probably has, with respect to his background, with his respect to his understanding of what happened with the Rust Belt, with his respect to understanding the frustration that a lot of Americans feel on the absence of good manufacturing jobs, of feeling like their country's left them behind, and being able to resonate and speak to that. JD Vance is the best within the MAGA movement. Rubio is someone that could bridge a gap between your kind of more MAGA crew, who are not as philosophically oriented in some of this stuff, but they understand that the elites have totally screwed them over. So I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm just saying that they're more interested in the practical application of what's going on, less interested in, let's have a bunch of conversations about esoteric principles. Rubio, I think, can speak to that side very well, and to the point where you had a JD Vance at the top of the ticket, Rubio as vice president. I think you would actually see a very, very good coalition of different people appealing to different sectors of the right, but in a way that's complementary, not contradictory. Right? When Reagan had to pick Bush as his vice president, that was to appease people that just saw that Reagan was probably going to win anyways, and this was their opportunity to have a seat at the table. But it wasn't because they were making a serious attempt to come on to Reagan-style conservatism. When you look at JD Vance and Marco Rubio, I think you see a lot of philosophical unity there. I don't think that's something. I don't think there's a big contradictory. I don't think there's a big compromise that's taking place that doesn't make sense for anything other than uniting the party. I think you actually see a unification there. You could have a governing coalition with that group, and that's why I think that would be interesting to see, and why I think right now, if I had to call it, I think that's the most likely outcome. Obviously, we're more than 2 years away from the election and the whole deal, and a lot can happen, especially if Democrats take the House. But for me, I see that as the kind of the most likely thing to transpire right now.
I probably would agree with you that most likely Vance will be the nominee in 28.
Yeah.
Whether he wins, I don't know. Certainly, I would hope that he does.
Well, the benefit too with both of these guys, they're also both young.
Yeah,
they're not. This is not their last. This is not their last chance. They're not, this isn't, if they don't run this time, the moment is past.
It's more that I think that there's this sense on the right that the hour is quite late at this point.
Yeah.
And on a macro scale, it's quite late. Like, we are in an age where it's not out of the realm of possibility for Democrats to immediately reopen the border, immediately re-import another 10, 20 million people.
Let's get into that into the third category here, because we do have a third category that's a little bit more dire.
Oh, now we get to Doom?
Well, we'll get to Doom. I know you've been waiting to get to Doom, but before we get to Doom, I want to throw out one other thing there. Let's say something like, because you made a good point. You said that a lot of the conditions that led to MAGA still exist, and people still want a leader for that. if it can't be somebody in the administration, the only person that I can look at right now that I think is probably in the best position to be able to do it with the credentials is Ron DeSantis. And the reason I say that is because if you look at what Ron has done in Florida, right? Ron doesn't have to worry about foreign policy. The only thing Ron had to do with, anything even resembling foreign policy was taking illegal immigrants and shipping them to Martha's Vineyard, which was a stroke of genius, right? And that's still immigration policy. But he's been able to laser focus on domestic policy. I could see there is a scenario where Trump is just getting trashed by Democrats in Congress. J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are not in a position where they can kind of extricate themselves. DeSantis is doubling down in Florida every step of the way. He just had another one where he came out and he told his legislature, he's like, you did some good stuff with this bill. You should have done more. You can impeach this liberal justice. Go impeach her. Like, he's focusing on the things right now that the coalition of MAGA that's upset about Iran because they just want more domestic focus. He's focusing on the very things they're pissed about, which are things like liberal judges, liberal domestic policy. So Ron DeSantis could spend the next 2 years while Trump administration is, theoretically just having to deal with the Democrat Congress. DeSantis could just be going as hard as possible on domestic policy in Florida and kind of, regalvanize that wing and set him up as an heir apparent. Do you think that's?
I mean, he shouldn't have run in 2024 because if he hadn't, then
I'm
everything
the one
you
that
just
said that. You said it was his moment.
Well, look, a lot has happened between 2023 and now. For me, like the Biden era really changed when we started this podcast, I was still a self-identified libertarian.
Yeah.
Time flies. This is the fourth. It's actually, what's funny? I believe it's either today or 2 days from now will be the 4th anniversary of making the argument.
Yeah.
In its current format with me, Tina occasionally being on.
Yeah.
Because it was around the time of my birthday in 2022, which is April 3rd. When we started doing this. So a lot's changed in 4 years, but yes, if DeSantis had not run in 2024, he would be in a position to run in 28 if he wanted to. What I think is probably going to happen is that DeSantis is going to leave office in next January, and he'll weigh his options. Do I run for something in Congress?
Yeah.
Do I run for a Senate seat? Do I run for the House maybe again? He used to be in the House. Do I just take a private sector job? Because you can do that as an ex-governor, right? You can take any job you want, basically. Do I retire from politics? Do I sit on the wings and wait for another opportunity to come along? Do I throw my my support behind somebody like Vance instead? And maybe, who knows? Vance might want to pick, him as his running mate or put him in his administration if he wins. The point is that DeSantis has a lot of options. I don't think that one of the options, though, is running for president in 28. If he had not run in 24, maybe, but I don't see DeSantis beating Vance in 28. Yeah. That doesn't mean that I think his career's over or anything like that.
I think he could be cabinet level official, whatever else it is. But I'm just saying that as I look at somebody that could still lead that movement, that it isn't currently in the Trump administration, DeSantis is the name that jumps to the top of the list. All right, now we're going to go into the third factor, and this has to do with, what happens if the coalition fractures? But before we get to that, I want to do a plug for our coffee. That's right, Brew Around and Find Out. We have done a partnership with First Cup. Tina, whose parents used to own a coffee shop, Tina has meticulously selected this blend, gone through several iterations to get it just right. And I'm telling you right now, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to wake up and be patriotic faster, Brew Around and Find Out is definitely the way to do it. Plus, it's the 250th anniversary of America, ladies and gentlemen. And what better coffee to drink than this coffee right here? Go ahead and try it out. Again, we love it. It's wonderful. You can order it right here. Go check it. I'm telling you, man, you can do the subscription. You can just come. You can put it. Maybe you purchase your. My wife is hotter than my coffee, and you put you put it in that. Win-win. Go check that out. All right, now we're going to talk about what happens if the coalition fractures. And there's a lot of people that are saying that's already happened. No, it hasn't. There's there's definitely stress, but it is not just ripped apart. Donald Trump is not pulling underwater with MAGA, or that's not happening. But there is stress on it, right? So you have two things: the left is saying, "Oh, it's over, it's dead. They all hate Trump now. That's ridiculous." And then, of course, you have the Trump administration saying everybody loves me no matter what I do, and it's like, okay, that's not true either, right? There's a middle ground here.
It's worth noting that Trump wasn't elected on just MAGA, though. Right?
No,
he won. He won the popular vote in 24 for the first time in 20 years for any Republican.
Yeah,
and he didn't just win it because everybody who was self-identified MAGA was a majority of the country, right?
Yeah,
that's what I mean when I say that you could have a coalition fracture, because at the end of the day, political coalitions are all temporary. They just are. Like, there's a reason that the New Deal coalition doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that was a huge coalition. Why would the Democrats throw this thing away that, delivered, what was that, like 5 straight presidential wins? Why would they just chuck it away? Well, because politics works where different factions come along and they reorient themselves towards different groups, because you have a two-party system, but within those two parties, you have a multitude of different ideologies, factions, worldviews, constituent groups, and they don't, you like, the story of American politics really since like Jefferson and Adams has been that no party can create a permanent majority, because the coalitions within those parties, the interest groups within those parties, change over time, right? Like, the New Deal coalition collapsed in probably the 1960s.
Well, let's
if not
talk,
earlier.
Let's talk about, because you've listed out some things here, and I tend to agree with this. Like, if you look at the Trump coalition, you have everything from working class populist, evangelical Christians, tech libertarians, foreign policy like people, foreign policy restraint, new Hispanic and Black working class voters, suburban normie conservatives, and yeah, I think that's an accurate depiction, right? Because again, MAGA makes up a significant portion of the Republican coalition right now. I would argue it's probably the dominant portion of the coalition right now, but it's also probably a plurality. I don't think, I'm not even sure if it's a net majority of the Republican coalition. It's probably a very, very strong plurality. Like, out of all the other groups that we mentioned there, I don't know which other one would probably rival it. Maybe the evangelical Christians, but the problem there is many of them don't vote, which is kind of shocking, but it's also true. And then you have some that, working class populists, that has been a kind of coalition that has existed throughout American history, really throughout all political history. And it waxes and wanes, right? Sometimes it's very, very strong. Sometimes it's weaker. It just kind of depends. Lately, it's been a lot more strong, and it's broken toward Trump. But the biggest one right now that is probably fracturing away from Donald Trump is the foreign policy people, who are just like, look, I don't want us involved in anything foreign. Some of those people were straight up isolationists, in a quite literal term. Most of them were just, I don't want any more wars. I don't want any more wars. I don't want us involved in anything. I certainly don't want us involved in nation building. That group right now is probably, I would say, the most fractured. The other question that's going to be, though, is when you look at some of the working class populists, are they also looking at it going, well, Trump has lost the narrative with respect to domestic issues, because look at all the foreign stuff we're involved in. Why are we spending more money overseas? Why are more Americans dying in foreign wars? Now, nothing compared to what it was before Trump came along. And I still maintain that Trump is not going to get us involved in a major land war in Iran.
The economy is also a problem with
when gas is $4 a gallon on average,
and like, we were campaigning against inflation, and it's probably going to come back because of an oil crisis now, right? Yeah. Oil's over $100 a barrel, and a lot of these people have to drive to work, right? Like, our coalition, like, this gets back to the heart of the problem of what we were talking about earlier. Like, there's this huge chunk of the right who are like the intellectual thought leaders, the political consultants, and they just live in an entirely different universe than their own party base. They like, there's this, like, we know this in Virginia. The GOP consultants in Virginia have no connection to their own. They don't know how to talk to their own voters. They just don't. They look down on them. They think that they're dumb and stupid. And we have this enormous disconnect between the party apparatus and the people that are voting for the party. Mm-hmm. The people that are voting for the party hate the party. They're like, I don't know a single person that likes the Republican Party. I know a bunch of people that think that the Democratic Party is like an existential threat to this country's continued existence.
Well,
that's the only reason that they're voting for Republicans.
I don't disagree with that. I'm also going to say this, which will get me in trouble, but it's freaking true. And I saw it after 10 years of being in elected office. I see a lot of people that complain a lot about the Republican Party who know almost nothing about how it functions in a place like Virginia. They know almost nothing about it. They have this impression of what it is, what it should do, what its responsibilities are, but they don't actually know. And that leads to a lot of frustration. Well, why are they doing this? I'm like, oh, well, they don't do that and they don't have the money for it. What do you mean they don't have the money for it? Like, literally, they don't have the money for it. They don't, like, have you ever donated to the Republican Party of Virginia? Well, no. Where do you think they get their money from? Like, that's the part that I will say, on having sat on the other side of this. And if people just want an honest opinion, because again, nobody can tell you I didn't stay true to my conservative principles the entire time I was in. Nobody can say I didn't try to fight every way I could. I did. And I would get frustrated with hardcore conservatives that would say, oh, Nick, they're all the same. I'd be like, no, they're really not. I know the Republicans you're frustrated with, and I will help you take them down and replace them with good ones. But please, for the love of God, stop telling me that they're all the same, because they're not. The Republicans I had the most frustration with in the House of Delegates were infinitely better than the best Democrat on the other side of the aisle when it actually came to policy. And so I will get frustrated with that, because I look at some of these people, some of the people that are most vocal and just hating the Republican Party, do it because it's a safe position to take. Oh, they all suck. They all this, they're all that, they're all the same, they're all corrupt, they're all that. You are not saying that because you've actually taken time to understand what's going on, who's doing what and why. You are saying that because it gives you an air of moral superiority in your ignorance. Like I said, this is going to get me in trouble. but it's true. And let me tell you why. Because a lot of Republicans know what they believe, they know what they want to see happen, but they're not investing the time and energy to get involved in what that process actually looks like. Why? Because they're not involved in politics, because they're obsessed with the day-to-day machinations of, politics. They want to be able to live their life, raise their family, and they want to be able to do it in common sense. And it baffles them why we can't just have that. And that's the part where, again, my frustration was, I'll tell you why we can't have it. Because when you go around saying, why can't we just have what we the people demand? Because we the people don't demand those things. And oh, by the way, the school you send your kid to is teaching your kid to want and demand something very different than what you demand. And when I tell you that, you get angry with me, but it's the truth. And so the things that I like, again, I'll go back to what I said before on my frustration with the kind of, they're all the same. What does it matter? They're not all the same. It matters a great deal. And Virginia is learning this the hard way right now, as we speak, learning it the hard way. But where do Republicans make their anger felt? In the general election. The dumbest possible place you can make your anger felt with your own side. If you're making your anger felt by staying at home, like Virginians did in the last gubernatorial election, you are only hurting yourself. It's not like the Democrats are like, oh my gosh, thank you, thank you, conservative worker or conservative voter, for staying home. We recognize that we couldn't have won without you. What are some things that we could do for you along with our coalition? That doesn't happen. They're like, oh, you don't care. Oh, you hate Republicans. Good. So do we. And now we're going to crush them. The part where you make your anger felt at your own party is in the primaries. And they just did this in Texas, by the way. And overwhelmingly, they just did this in Texas. And they're going to get very different representation as a result. But I don't know. I want to look at, you actually laid out 5 different fault lines. And so let's go through these fairly quickly. Let's do a summary of each one, and then we'll go to our final conclusions.
Yeah. So the first one is tech versus the working class.
Yeah, definitely.
A good example of this was in December 2024, right after Trump won. There was this big blow up on Twitter over the H-1B program. Yeah. And Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy were talking about, we need better talent. And Vivek had some tweet, and it wasn't just those two. There were other people, like Chris Rufo mentioned something about like working at Panda Express, and that turned into a meme.
Yeah.
You had like a chunk of people on the right that liked a lot of what Rufo had done against the DEI regime, right, in universities, but they fired back at Rufo and were like, oh, okay, so the left will construct this vast patronage network and they will plug their activists into these cushy roles who do nothing except agitate for state power, and they take care and nurture their radicals.
Yeah.
Even ones who were more radical than them. That's the whole point, is to have a new generation that are further to the left than they are. And they take care of their people. And the right's message to their intellectual base, right?
Yeah.
Their activists is go get a job at Panda Express.
Yeah.
Learn
how to code. Yeah. Well, and now with AI coming on, there is no question that there are some people, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, they're like, well, of course I would stop self-driving cars because it'll hurt the trucking industry. And it's like, okay, Tucker, here's the problem, right? The Model T Ford devastated the horse industry eventually. So you can't just uninvent technology that is going to make things drastically more efficient. Like, that's not a thing. By the same token, though, he's not wrong that AI will be the most disruptive technology. But interestingly enough, there's a lot of people predicting that it'll be far more disrupting for white collar jobs than blue collar jobs.
Yeah.
Because AI can do a lot of it. Like, you look at a lot of the high finance stuff and things like that. There's no question, because we used to say this in the Intel world. A human intelligence analyst is better at understanding human interactions and motivations and things like that. So they're better at doing that kind of analysis, but they're horrible at scaling. Right? They're horrible at taking massive amounts of data from multiple different places, bringing it together in order to, create that picture. And so what you did was you gave the analyst that was capable of understanding the human interaction and the objectives, and then you gave them a tool which helped them scale more. Well, when you look at a lot of these other jobs, it's some of the white collar jobs that might be in a lot more danger as a result of AI than it is somebody working in a manufacturing job.
Yeah, I've got this, unfortunately, no, I'm trying to and I can't. Yeah, so I've got this tweet that that explains the problem. So Oracle laid off 30,000 employees yesterday.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a ton.
Yeah. And I had a tweet like just a few days before that, and then I reposted it and I was like, oh, I can tell this is going to get some incredible mileage. And I wrote, it's like working at a steel mill in Gary, Indiana in 1965 while being cursed with the foresight of what's about to happen next.
Yeah.
The context is that Gary, Indiana, heart of the Rust Belt, used to be a big city, over 100,000 people, suburb of Chicago, major steelworking industry. Like it was created by steel companies as a town. And by the time you got to like the 70s, the economy collapsed, the jobs moved out. Gary is like a war-torn ghost town at this point, right? Like one of the worst places in America. It used to be very wealthy, middle-class city. The AI stuff, I think, is getting to that point that it could do to white-collar, professional managerial class type positions, which are actually disproportionately left-wing. What globalization, free trade to a point, but really people leave out. People talk about those things. The third thing is actually really like our fiat currency system, the Bretton Woods system.
Well, this is why
the Triffin dilemma is what did that to the Rust Belt.
They're not pushing again too for UBI, universal basic income, and things like that, because they're anticipating a world where there just aren't enough jobs for humans. And their argument is going to be, well, the efficiency will be so great, there'll be so much abundance that essentially we can pay people to sit at home and do nothing, while the number of jobs shifts. But that has major moral implications, because we're created to work and be creative and be productive. And when you just pay a bunch of people to sit around, you don't get people who are like, oh, I'm just so happy I can read poetry.
You probably get more progressivism.
Yes. And because then it will be a never-ending push to increase the UBI, never-ending. And so the problem is there's no question that AI will be probably the most disruptive technology of all of human history. And it's going to happen relatively quickly, right? We're not talking about, this is not 5 years from now. This is within this year. We will see massive disruptions as a result.
So that's the first thing, is tech versus working class. That's a potential coalition fracture. We've already seen evidence of that. Second one, we've talked about already.
Foreign policy.
I'll just reiterate, foreign policy, right? Like we don't need to say any more about that, but that is another point. Next one is kind of related to the first one, but not quite. Social conservatives versus the libertarian tech right. So the Silicon Valley types, the just leave me alone types, I just want to live my life types, versus the social conservatives that are like, no, this country's like its moral system's disintegrating in real time.
Yeah, the social conservatives, of which I think they've
been totally vindicated at this point.
They are looking at it going, no, this is all the stuff that you thought was good to just let everybody do, and is led to a degree of social degeneracy. We didn't like it because of the degeneracy itself, but you shouldn't like it because it actually creates more voters that hate the things you like with respect to free market economics, with respect to private property rights. The degeneracy component impacts far more than just us Bible-believing Christians, right? Like you can mock us all day long. We were right.
These social progressives never, a tiny fraction of them will turn into libertarian, free market, right-wing people. But the overwhelming 90% of these people that become social progressives become just leftists.
Well, and the social conservatives are also saying, like, we drew a straight line from you starting to redefine marriage, for you starting to redefine what was socially acceptable with unions, with sex, with whatever. We drew a straight line from that, and you told us we were making a slippery slope fallacy, and now they're transing children. So screw you, we were right, you were wrong, and resetting this to 15 years ago doesn't solve the underlying problems. But again, you're kind of tech bros. They're like, again, it's just I reset and we're fine, and you do you and I'll do me. And it's like,
these are the people that will say things like, I'm not a progressive, I'm a liberal.
Yeah. So so there's that. And then you have the multiracial coalition. So explain what you mean by that.
Yeah. So we've got this big question about a kind of like ethnic and racial realignment that took place in the last cycle.
Yeah.
Because Trump made huge inroads with Black and Hispanic voters,
Yeah.
particularly Black and Hispanic men that were working class men as well, like enormous swings. Like we're talking about demographics that, just a few years ago were 90% Democrat, now being like 75-25 or 60-40 in some cases.
That's massive.
In the case of Hispanic men, Trump won them. Trump won Hispanic men by, I think, about the same margin that he won white women by, which is shocking.
And what's interesting to point out too is that there was two components. Again, the Hispanic men that he won were not like Elon Musk tech bros. They're socially conservative and they want good jobs, right? And they understood the problem with immigration. They understood the problem with crime. They want to raise their kids in safe neighborhoods where their values are reflected, and they sure as hell don't want you to try to trans their kids in their schools. But to the point about how does this potentially break apart, and this is one of my issues with the Nick Fuentes wing, right? I completely understand going, why have white men been the only people, straight white men are the only people you're allowed to discriminate against now, right? Actively discriminate and denigrate. And that's absolutely true, and it deserves to be called out. Nick Fuentes takes it to the other side where it's, I want to discriminate in reverse.
Well, Nick Fuentes also went out there, and when the police, questioned him, he said, "I'm Mexican."
Yeah.
So, like, everybody gets to play this favorite ethnic card, apparently.
Well, but
except for actual white men.
Well, here's the part too.
I don't get to play the "I'm Mexican" card if the police are confronting me.
Well, the other part that's interesting about this is that this used to be a feature of conservatism, and it still is a feature of conservatism, but it's something that I think Nick Fuentes is tearing away from, because he's going in more of the tribal approach. It used to be that the conservative tribe was, do you want to worship God, raise your family, work hard, build a life, if that's the stuff you want to do, well, then we don't care. We don't care what your skin color looks like. We don't care, where you might have originated from, as long as you came here legally. That these are all things that we recognize and associate ourselves with. And I think I think that is a strong feature of conservatism, because it also harkens back to Christianity, where it's like, no, look, if you believe these values, then there's a unity there, there's a family there that we all belong to, regardless of your race or regardless of, your economic status or things like that.
But that's unity is threatened through mass migration.
Oh, no, I agree.
Christianity could unify the Roman Empire, but when the Rhine border was not guarded, and the entire Frankish nation poured into Gaul, they did not become magically Romans.
No,
right?
I agree. That's the difference, right? Is that you have to assimilate into the culture. I had this argument with this German immigrant at Virginia Tech. I was doing a tabling there with Turning Point, and he was talking about, J.D. Vance is talking about America is how many generations you have here, and I fundamentally oppose that. Again, a German immigrant was telling me what being an American is. He goes, I fundamentally oppose that. It's just it's a set of ideals, and Barack Obama talked about it's about the set of ideals in our Constitution, and I'm like, yeah, but Barack Obama didn't believe that. Clearly, he didn't believe that. And while I agree that being an American is more than just being American is a commitment to a certain set of principles, which, oh, by the way, the left isn't committed to. So I guess they're not real Americans then, right? But no, it also does have something to do with how long you've lived here. I'm also not going to tell somebody that has those principles that's been here for 9 generations that, oh, no. It's all the same. It doesn't matter. No, that stuff matters too. It may not be the most important factor, but it's a factor. I said, and then please don't tell me that you can't allow for mass immigration from cultures which have diametrically opposed social, economic, political, and theological traditions. Well, name me a country where you can't allow. I said anywhere in the Middle East. Like here's a good thing. If you believe it's okay to stone a woman to death for showing her hair in public, you may not be someone we want to mass immigrate into the United States, because that's probably not a recipe for strong social cohesion. Am I a xenophobe, or is that just common sense? So no, I agree. When it comes to the coalition, the most important aspect of the conservative coalition is, what do you really believe? But the idea that you can mass import people, especially from cultures with diametrically opposed worldviews, and they'll just magically become Americans because we made them U.S. citizens. That's not the same. You can be a U.S. citizen and not be a good American. The left proves it almost on a daily basis.
So that's a real concern.
Yeah.
The one thing that's saving us with these gains that we got in 2024 is that the Democratic Party has lost the ability to talk to these type of people.
Yeah.
They don't know how. Like,
no.
if you're a working class person, white, black, or Hispanic, and Democrats are talking about trans and kids, right? Like,
or look, we just let a guy from Sierra Leone with 30 separate charges.
Yeah, go stab a woman
to death, and now we're not going to hand him over to ICE because,
like, we're just explicitly the pro-criminal party.
Yes. Yeah.
That does not resonate with these type of people, regardless of where they are in the country. So, like, that's the one thing that's helping us here, is that the other side is arguably worse when it comes to messaging with working class people. But the party we have, this is part of the reason why we need an immigration moratorium, because we need to find out who we are as Americans. What does that mean? We have way too many people. Like, we have a record number of immigrants in this country.
Yeah.
Like, matching the height of the Ellis Island days.
Yeah.
It's unprecedented what's happened to our country.
Yeah.
And you cannot have a country sustain itself on just principles when half the country openly makes their political identity about rejecting those principles, while you have an open borders mass migration policy. The whole thing is just going to disintegrate. It will go the way of the West Roman Empire if you don't get this under control.
No, it's absolutely true, and the left did it deliberately. Like, here's what the left realized: even though they had effectively ideological capture of the public school system, of higher education, of the media, of Hollywood, etc., even then their message did not resonate with enough people to get the sort of control that they actually needed to push what they want. And so what do? They mass import a population. They immediately try to get them into situations where they can hold them up as the victim, put themselves in the position of protecting them in the hopes of making a loyal voting demographic. What did they find out? Well, they found out that even a lot of the people they were trying to immigrate into the country didn't like what they had to say. And so that created a problem with them. They also abort too many of their own kids or sterilize their own children through trans surgeries. And so the point is they are losing that fight domestically. They have to import another population, and they keep searching for one that will just be a loyal voting demographic. And what they're finding out the hard way is that it's actually not Hispanics. And so that creates an additional problem for them, which is, again, why they like to increase the refugee status, because now they can selectively point to the countries in the world with the most problems, the most issues, which also usually happen to be the countries with the most diametrically opposed worldviews when it comes to the critical issues which build a civilization. They can import them, make them fully dependent on the Democratic Party, and that's how they attain power. And there's no question they've been doing that. The final category,
I think this is a very big one.
I think this is the biggest it's been in my lifetime, and it's the most misunderstood, which...
What do you mean by misunderstood?
So the class divide. We're talking about that now.
Yeah.
So the class divide at the top. This is the 1% or whatever it is. This has always been a leftist narrative of class, of economic class. The United States actually did a very good job of pushing back against economic class divisions because we had a system which afforded really good upward economic mobility. that is now being challenged in a number of different ways where current generations do not think they will live better than the previous generation. And that's unusual. That's a major departure from what the past has been in America. The problem is that the leftist narrative was built around that originally. It's gone off in these other things with critical theory because the left recognized that they couldn't compete with the West economically. They couldn't do it. And so they had to find other moral causes. They're starting to shift back toward the economic. And it is a message that can resonate because the bottom line is to actually understand why we're in the position right now. If you really understand why we're in the position right now where more and more people are finding it more difficult. And by the way, can I just say something? There's a combination of real factors on the ground and doomerism, which isn't healthy, right? There's a whole lot of, oh my gosh, it's the worst it's ever been. No, it isn't. No, it freaking isn't. But it is worse than it used to be. And that's a departure. And the economic conditions are not set up to improve it. And that's now the left will come in with their solution. The left will come in with rich people bad. We're defending you, put us in power, and we will take from them and we'll give it to you. And that's going to be a very, very simple and compelling argument. What I wish people would understand about economics is A, that won't work. B, the reason why we're in this situation right now is not because of free market economics. The reason why we're in this position right now is because of the very government interventions that the Democrats want to increase. It's fiat currency. It's things like the Federal Reserve. It's things like the federal income tax. It's things like Social Security and a massive welfare state. All of these things have contributed immeasurably to the current economic conditions now where, again, you only have so many workers for one person on retirement. You have the boomers, which got all the money from America being on top economically, but they also fed into all of the elaborate government welfare systems. They also set themselves up to be in a position to be able to get the best of both worlds, where they get the full benefits of their Social Security on top of their massive retirement and on top of their pension programs, many of which were enforced and subsidized by the state. And what's essentially doing is it's creating conditions downstream now where we cannot support these massive, we just can't support them anymore. And the solution is to actually erode government involvement in the economy, but that will be a much harder argument to make. And this is the part where I could see us losing working class voters to a leftist narrative. And that's the part that's, and again, the crazy part will be is that the Democrats actually did a good job of contributing to the sort of Marxist demoralization of the culturally shaping institutions. It had a delayed reaction, but yeah, I mean,
you said that this was complicated though, and like, it's not that I disagree with what you said, but everything that I heard was not that complicated, right? That's the story of how the left has been messaging for a long time. So like, what makes it?
Go out and talk to someone right now that is just working really hard at their job, trying to pay rent or trying to pay their mortgage. Go say, hey, I want to sit down with you and I want to have an intimate discussion about welfare policy. I want to talk about marginal utility. I want to talk about monetary policy and how it impacts things. I want to talk about the dollar milkshake theory. Like you tell me, and it's not because they're dumb. It's because they have better things to focus on. They have more important and more pressing matters. It would probably be kind of ridiculous if they took time out of their very busy day to really dig into dollar milkshake theory.
The way that I mean, maybe it's just different perspectives, and there's actually not a terrible amount of disagreement between you and I on this, but I think the right has its own class divide that is different than the way that the left approaches class. The way that the left approaches class is the old school socialist with, in some cases, Marxist rhetoric or framing, right? It's the bourgeoisie or the oppressors, right?
Yeah.
The right has its own problem.
Yeah.
We have a donor class and a political class that have different priorities than the majority base of the party.
Totally true.
You cannot tell somebody, doesn't matter what the laws of economics are, doesn't matter what the marginal utility is, doesn't matter what the most efficient thing is. You cannot go to somebody who is a 50-year-old working class voter whose job was laid off and his factory was shut down in Michigan and say effectively, this country doesn't need you anymore.
No, of course not.
And expect them to just sit there and take it.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, oh, I don't give a damn what you think the most effective economic policy is. I'm going to vote for tariffs. I'm going to vote for protectionism because what you're telling me is this economy, this country doesn't need me anymore. I built this country. This country is my country, not your country, not immigrants' countries. This country doesn't belong to immigrants. It doesn't belong to the donor class. It belongs to me. It belongs to my kin. It belongs to my family.
Christian, I agree with all that, but here's the problem that you are going to have to run into. That can all be true. Guess what's also true? The laws of economics. And this is the part that has frustrated me about especially politicians on the left, but also some politicians on the right. It's like, you can't tell me this. I did this and I did that. And this is my country. Wow. Wow. How inspiring. I guess gravity doesn't exist anymore, right? Because you're inspiring. No, we actually have to abide by the laws of economics while at the same time creating an environment where the person you just mentioned can thrive within that system. And that's my problem is like, we can't just give a bunch of hoorah speeches and all of a sudden economics doesn't exist anymore. That's what the left does. But you're absolutely right that the right has done a horrible job with this. It's all about economic efficiency. Well, that's not your only consideration, because if your goal is economic efficiency and you offshore every good paying job in the process, well, then when the people rise up and kill you, or when they rise up and at the very least replace you with somebody else that's going to engage in maybe even worse economic policy, you haven't fixed anything.
That is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest issue on the right that I see is this total disconnect between its leaders,
yes,
who want something very different than what the base wants. Our political leaders, more or less, our consulting class, our donor class, want something that is different than what the voting base wants, because the consulting and donor class want efficiency, they want good government, and a lot of people want those things, but nobody is going to vote to make themselves obsolete in their own country, right? Nobody's going to make themselves unemployed or unemployable in their own country. And again, like you cannot reduce people to cogs in an economic machine. Politics cannot be reduced to just pure economics.
I agree, but so I totally agree with that. One of my big issues with, like, again, like the kind of the Cato wing of the libertarian side is this idea that this is all either about rigid adherence to the non-aggression principle, or it's this idea about maximizing economic efficiency. And then what you end up doing is you end up treating the whole world as one big marketplace with no real borders, because this is all just one big economic zone, right? Because that's the most important thing. And the part that drives me nuts about that thinking is like, you don't get the free market economic environment you want in a world where over half the country despises it. You don't get that. Like, there's this bizarre belief that, well, if we just get here and make everyone prosperous enough, they'll just automatically see that this is the way to go. Human beings are more complex. They don't see themselves as just economic animals. That's a false narrative. In fact, it's more of a Marxist narrative if you think about it. But there's a wing of the Libertarian Party that falls into defining people along those causes and just says, well, we have a better way for you to define yourself as an economic cog. And so this is the part where, again, you do have to walk a line. And the line has to be, you are trying to create a culture where people believe that free market economics actually is what's best for them. But if you're going to do that, it actually has to be what's best for them. And so how do you navigate that? And this is the part where you understand that, look, it's not just about maximizing economic efficiency. Because if maximizing economic efficiency is we outsource our pharmaceutical industry to China, or we outsource steel somewhere else, you can find yourself in a pretty dangerous situation pretty quick. It might even be a situation where if you're outsourcing, and I get the argument, right? Like, well, if you put tariffs on steel, yeah, it might help the steel industry, but it hurts every other American industry which relies on steel because now they have to pay more for the steel. I get it. But if there's a strategic resource that is absolutely necessary to your economy to be able to function even in wartime or even periods of conflict or other sort of economic disruption, does that get any additional consideration, or is it just maximum efficiency? And again, that's the part where I'm saying that is a complex argument. And unfortunately, we have to make a complex argument if we want to be honest. But in the interim, we do have to address, like, again, when it comes to $4 gas, that's just $4 gas. And there is some things we could do pretty quickly that would bring down $4 gas. The problem is that it might be a little embarrassing to do right now. But with midterms coming up, this is the part where I totally agree with you. I may look at the long arc of history and say, I would love this and I would love this and I would love this. But the bottom line is I have midterms coming up in November. So what allows me to actually continue along the pursuit of what I want in November? Well, it sure as hell isn't losing to Democrats. And anything that is contributing to me losing to Democrats, even if I might understand the reasoning, even if I might understand the arguments, this is the part that the Republican Party has to get a better job at doing.
We can't let these people back in. This country cannot survive another Biden term.
No,
it can't.
Well, in the point, and again, we'll be talking about this. Actually, we'll be talking about this soon. Christian and I are working on this because when we do this episode, we want it to be very well done. But we are going to entertain the idea, and we're going to do it here in probably in the next few weeks. We're going to entertain the idea of what does it mean? We're talking about who the Republican candidate could be in 2028. We're talking about what could happen in the midterms. We're going to do some episodes where we talk about what's likely to happen in the midterms, what it would actually mean for those 2 years, and how Democrats are going to do everything they can to set themselves up for success in 2028. But we also need to have a discussion on what happens if they get the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Because I don't think... I think a lot of the people that are frustrated with Trump, that are frustrated with Republicans, that are saying there's no difference, or they're saying that they're not going to show up because you lied to me because I didn't get everything I wanted out of you, or because you did some things I didn't expect you to do or didn't want you to do, or even maybe some things that you say they said they wouldn't do. The alternative is not, okay, I'll show them by putting the Democrats in power. If you put the Democrats in power again, they are working as hard and as fast as they can to consolidate power in such a way to where they don't lose it again. And if you don't think that's possible, I'm telling you it is. I'm telling you it is. We're actually watching the model for it in Virginia right now. And if you don't think they can apply that on a national stage, they can. They can. And they wouldn't have any compunction about doing it because they think it's the moral thing to do. So understanding this coalition, understanding what happens in 2028, the reason why we're talking about it now is because if we're not thinking about it now, then we can't actually view the midterms within the proper perspective. We can't view what's going on in our individual states or even our individual lives within the proper perspective if we don't have an understanding of what is most likely to happen and how do you actually prepare for that. Hopefully, how do you alter it, but then how do you prepare for it if it does happen? Because you imagine them stacking the Supreme Court. You imagine a new Supreme Court that's been stacked, deciding the Second Amendment doesn't mean what it means. Deciding that, forget a Supreme Court where we're rethinking birthright citizenship. Think of a liberal Supreme Court. I want you to imagine all the worst decisions you've seen from liberal judges right now, and I want you to imagine that being the law of the land within the United States Supreme Court. And again, people get mad or like, stop, do something. Don't just talk about how bad the Democrats would be. I get it, but we have to consider both. Well, we hope you have found this useful. Tell us what you think. What do you think about the three groups that we've talked about? What do you think about the coalitions and the 5 things that Christian's laid out? I think he's done a good job here. And what do you think is most likely to happen? And maybe what do you think we need to be doing in order to make sure the midterms don't turn out as horrible as they possibly could? Plus, just want to plug this here real quick. We got the Man Book. That's right. It's basically just me taking 26 years of marriage, 22 years of being a parent, couple combat tours, years in the legislature, being a business owner, and laying out some things I've learned along the way that I think would be good for every man to know. This is the stuff that a lot of the stuff, some of it I did know as a young man, some of it I wish I would have known as a young man, but hopefully it's the sort of thing where if you're a young man or maybe a middle-aged man, you'll find some stuff in here that's useful. Again, get the book that John Lovell described as the worst coloring book ever. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.